Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into the grim, dangerous, and utterly unglamorous world of medieval assassins. Those shadowy figures who supposedly crept through castle halls and darkened alleys, changing history with a blade and a whisper, while Hollywood makes them look cooler than a polar bear wearing sunglasses. The truth is, being a medieval assassin seriously, unequivocally, astronomically sucked. So, before you get comfortable, maybe grab a snack that isn't secretly poisoned. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Just try not to flinch every time the cat walks by. The career path, more like a collapsed bridge to nowhere. Let's be clear, no one in medieval times woke up and said, "You know what? I'd like to stab a nobleman in the throat for 12 silver coins, and the honour of hiding in a barrel for 3 days. That's a career ambition for someone who has already lost a bet with a goblin. Becoming an assassin wasn't a career path. It was more like the last stop on the life went horribly wrong, and now I smell faintly of desperation and unwashed linen train. We're not talking about a recruiter coming to your village fair, setting up a booth with colourful pamphlets, promising competitive benefits and a generous pension plan. No, the only benefits involved were usually avoiding starvation for another week, and the pension was hoping you didn't end up decorating the local gallows. Most medieval assassins weren't mysterious loners who had spent decades in mountaintop temples, perfecting their silent death moves while listening to Gregorian chants. Oh no, that's a movie script, not a medieval reality. In truth, they were the absolute bottom of society's very muddy barrel. We're talking desperate peasants whose crops failed for the 3rd year in a row, and whose cow mysteriously vanished. We're talking disgraced soldiers who got caught stealing a chicken, not a strategic battle plan, or ex-thieves with a decent aim but a really bad sense of smell. And let's not forget the people so far off society's radar, they could literally kill a duke in broad daylight and still not be noticed in the annual census. Excuse me, sir, are you on this list of taxable citizens? Nope, never seen me before. Just a very tall bush, thank you. Seriously, if you were well off, you didn't become an assassin. You hired one. If you had a title, a smidge of land, or even a goat to your name that hadn't been eaten by wolves yet, you were firmly in the management class. You were the one nervously sipping wine, looking over your shoulder, and sending furtive glances towards anyone with an unusually sharp butter knife. But if you just escaped debtor's prison by gnawing through a wall, if you had a reputation for solving problems, and by problems we mean people, and if you could sneak into a tavern without even the barkeep noticing you until you ordered your 3rd ale, then congratulations. Your life just took a very dark, very sharp turn. Someone, somewhere, probably cloaked and whispering in a dimly lit corner, was about to slide a coin purse across a grimy table and whisper a name. And that name wasn't Bob the quiet turnip farmer from down the road. Oh no, Bob was safe. This was usually a corrupt baron with a penchant for ill-fitting tunics, a bishop with more gold than piety, or someone with 12 heavily armed bodyguards, 3 snarling mastiffs, and a moat full of very hungry, very irritable alligators. The pay, tempting, like a shiny, rotting apple. The job, horrifying, like a surprise dental appointment with a blacksmith. But by the time someone considered this line of work, they genuinely had nothing left to lose. no family to protect, no future to dream of, and definitely no medieval dental plan, because who needs teeth when you're constantly hiding in sewers? And let's not forget the absolute lack of job perks. No pension, no glorious retirement parties, no Employee of the Month parking spot. You couldn't exactly hang up a shingle that read, "Quiet eliminations by appointment. References available upon successful completion of primary objective." You just had to stay quiet, move faster than a greased pig at a feast, and never, ever tell anyone what you did for a living. Especially not loudly over a tankard of suspiciously cloudy ale at the inn. "Oh yeah, I'm a travelling carpet seller. The stains, just really strong dye from, rare purple flowers." So, yes, nobody, absolutely nobody, dreamed of being a medieval assassin while they were carving wooden toys as a child. They landed there because the world chewed them up, spit them out, and then casually dressed them in a hood and handed them a rusty dagger. You weren't the hero of the story. You weren't even the mustache-twirling villain. You were the barely legible footnote in a very gruesome history book. The footnote that made everyone nervous and probably didn't live long enough to actually enjoy the meager coin you earned. Training day. More like avoiding death by accidentally tripping over a chicken day. Let's burst the first myth wide open, shall we? Medieval assassins did not train under candlelight in some hidden monastery, surrounded by wise, bearded mentors, spouting ancient proverbs, and playing inspirational flute music in the background. There was no serene dojo, no elegant forms, no wax-off moment, where you learned the secret to silent movement by scrubbing rusty armor. There was no montage, no slow-motion leaps through misty forests, no teacher, no pep talk. If you learned anything at all, it was by the extremely painful trial and error method of not dying the first few times you attempted your grim profession. Imagine your first day on the job. All right, apprentice, see that guard. Try to sneak past him without him noticing you. If he doesn't notice, great. If he does, well, that's a learning experience for someone, isn't it? Most medieval assassins weren't trained professionals. They were desperate amateurs with a decent sense of direction, which was probably honed by repeatedly getting lost in the woods, and the astonishing ability to climb quietly without sneezing. Seriously, the unsung hero of many a medieval assassination was probably the assassin's exceptional allergy management. If you happened to have military experience, say you were a disgraced mercenary who got booted for gambling away his sword, great. That meant you at least knew how to hold a knife properly without cutting your own thumb off. If not, well, stabbing someone is fairly intuitive, as long as you aim for the squishy bits. But escaping afterward, with both kidneys still intact, and without a furious mob of villagers wielding farming implements chasing you, that takes a specific kind of skill, or an incredible amount of luck. Usually just dumb, improbable luck. There were no manuals titled Assassin for Dummies, no guild orientation meetings with name tags and lukewarm punch, no safety briefings before you scale a castle wall during a thunderstorm. You didn't get taught how to spot a body double. You figured it out when you realized the nobleman you just stabbed was suspiciously flat. You didn't learn where nobles kept their secret bedroom exits. You found out when you ended up in the privy again. You figured it all out while hanging precariously from a windowsill, 3 stories up, wondering if you just crept into the servants' quarters for the 3rd time that week and were about to be caught stealing laundry. Poison. Ah, the subtle art of medieval toxicology. That was trial and error, with a heavy, heavy emphasis on error. You didn't have precise measurements or laboratory-grade ingredients. You had plants you picked from the local bog, suspicious-looking mushrooms that tasted like despair, minerals that gave off weird fumes, or maybe the occasional toad you squeezed for its noxious secretions. Some poisons worked instantly, like a really bad surprise party. Some took hours, giving your target ample time to regret their life choices and compose a dramatic farewell letter. Some just made your victim vomit for 2 days straight and then recover, angrier than a badger in a beehive, and now very, very suspicious of his soup, his wine, and the new stable boy who hums a lot. There was no medieval poison control hotline, just hope, a lot of herbal guesswork, and a strong stomach, mostly for dealing with the smells of medieval life, but also for when your experimental concoction went sideways. Sure, if you were lucky, and lottery-winning, unicorn-sighting lucky, you might have picked up some rudimentary skills from thieves or mercenaries you met hiding under the same bridge. Maybe an older, grizzled assassin who was inexplicably still alive showed you how to walk without squeaking on cobblestones, or how to tell if a guard was actually asleep, or just faking it to catch clumsy idiots. But mentoring wasn't standard. It was rare, short-lived, and usually involved the mentor disappearing shortly after imparting their wisdom, either due to retirement or, more likely, a sudden fatal encounter with a very sharp object, because assassins don't retire quietly with a golden watch. They disappear, often messily. Weapons training, forget the fancy, ornate swords or throwing knives. You weren't carrying a broadsword that weighed more than you did. You had a dagger you probably stole off a sleeping guard. Maybe a garrote made from a piece of rope you found, if you were feeling particularly fancy, and whatever else fit under your tattered cloak without jingling like a leper's bell. So no, you weren't some shadowy martial arts master, performing gravity-defying acrobatics. You were a guy with calloused hands, quiet footsteps that usually led to a mud puddle, and a deeply unhealthy relationship with alleyways. Success didn't come from elegant training. It came from brutal, desperate survival. You learned how to kill by doing it quickly, sloppily, then vanishing into the nearest shadow before anyone could get a good enough look to sketch your face and tack it to a church door, offering a reward for your capture. In short, your education was brutal, practical, involved a lot of hiding, and offered zero graduation ceremonies, just bruises, bloodstains, and the creeping, soul-crushing realization that you were very much on your own. Always. The paycheck, paid in promises, panic attacks, and the occasional rotting turnip. Let's talk about why anyone in their right mind, or lack thereof, would become an assassin in the first place. Coin. Cold, heavy, jangly, deliciously spendable coin. The promise of it, glimmering like a mirage in the desert, is what got you into this mess. You dreamed of warm bread, a dry bed, maybe even a clean shirt that didn't smell faintly of desperation. But the reality, you got paid in lies, and often just the promise of lies. When someone hires an assassin, they don't want a long-term relationship, a weekly catch-up coffee, or a Christmas card. They want a one-time service, no paperwork, and ideally, no witnesses, including you, the person they hired. They'd offer you a pouch of silver, half now, half when the job is done. That's if they're feeling particularly generous, or perhaps just stupidly confident. But here's the insidious twist. When the job is done is typically code for after we verify you didn't mess it up, or make us look bad, or leave a trail that leads directly back to us, or, most importantly, survive long enough to tell anyone about it. So you do the job. You sneak through the darkest shadows, risk your life, maybe kill a corrupt baron in his sleep. It's not pretty, It's not poetic. There are no dramatic monologues or slow motion delivers. It's usually quick, messy, and followed by a sudden urge to flee. And when you return, expecting your hard-earned second half of the payment, yes, about that payment, the client fled. Terribly sorry. Something about a sudden need to visit a distant cousin in outer Mongolia. Pity, really. Or worse, and far more common, they try to kill you. A knife to the gut is considerably cheaper than a bonus payment, and it's certainly more discreet than a financial transaction. And even when you do manage to squeeze some coin out of them, it's never quite enough. Not for the bone-chilling risk. Not for the literal blood on your hands. Not for the 3 days you spent hiding in a haystack with fleas, moral regret, and a suspicious number of mice. You get a handful of tarnished coins, a curt nod that probably means, now, get lost before I change my mind, and a stern reminder that you were never here, that this conversation never happened, and that your existence is purely coincidental. And if you happen to mention it to anyone, well, let's just say a lot of accidents happen in medieval towns. Also, fun fact, some contracts were fake political traps, cunningly designed to eliminate you rather than a target. You'd be told to assassinate someone dangerous, maybe a rival lord or a particularly annoying jester, only to find out it was a decoy with a dozen highly motivated guards waiting for you, probably with a banner that read, "Welcome, sucker. Congratulations, you just walked straight into a sting operation, and your name was already carved on the local gallows, probably next to a crudely drawn caricature of you looking utterly bewildered. And even when the deal was legitimate, and you actually earned your coin, you couldn't exactly go to court and file a complaint. Your Honour, I'd like to sue Lord Edmund for breach of assassin contract. He promised me 50 silver for disposing of his brother-in-law, and I only got 20. This is an outrage. The only court you'd see would be the one where you were the prime exhibit, possibly on a spike. So you learned, quickly and painfully, to take what you could, demand as much payment upfront as possible, and trust absolutely no one. Not even the greasy little scribe who swore this job would change your life. It did, mostly by shortening it considerably and adding a permanent twitch to your eye. Being an assassin meant living on broken promises and vanishing into the night before those promises broke you entirely. It was a vicious cycle of desperation, violence, and the faint, lingering smell of desperation. The toolkit, rusty daggers, questionable poisons, and a whole lot of hope. So, you've accepted the job. You've been lied to about the pay. You're probably going to die. But hey, at least you have your tools, right? Forget the fantasy novels and sneaky video games, where assassins wield retractable wrist blades, throw smoke bombs with elegant flair, carry enchanted daggers that glow faintly, or possess crossbows that fold neatly into their boot. The reality? Your toolkit consisted of whatever you could steal, sharpen against a rock, or hide beneath a tattered, moth-eaten cloak without making enough noise to wake a sleeping guard. If you were lucky, and I mean found a gold coin in a dead man's shoe lucky, or perhaps stumbled upon a magically growing loaf of bread, you had a good dagger, not ornate, mind you, not curved like a dragon's tooth, or encrusted with rare jewels, just sharp, hopefully rust-free, and ideally one that didn't smell faintly of the last guy you stabbed with it, because nothing gives away a stealthy assassin like a weapon that smells like regret and old blood. Poison? Oh, it existed, sure, but it wasn't as glamorous as a slow, elegant drip into a wine goblet during a lavish banquet. Most medieval poisons were unpredictable, made from suspicious plants you found growing near graveyards, mushrooms that looked decidedly unhappy, various obscure minerals, or maybe the occasional toad you squeezed for its noxious secretion. You had to gather them, grind them with a pestle and mortar that probably doubled as a kitchen tool, and then pray to whatever deity would listen. And even then, it might just give the target a nasty stomach ache and a renewed commitment to his anti-assassin guard team. There was no precise scientific measurement. You didn't dose with clinical accuracy. You eyeballed it. A pinch too little, and the noble just vomits dramatically and cancels dinner, making you look incompetent. A pinch too much, and you might die from exposure to your own concoction before the first course is even served. Nobody ever mentions the self-inflicted poisonings in the assassin handbooks. Ropes, occasionally useful. You could strangle someone, climb a suspiciously slippery wall, or tie something up with one. But you'd better know how to use it fast and silently, because nothing kills the mood of a clandestine operation like trying to wrestle someone while muttering, "Wait, which knot goes under again? Is it the granny knot or the square knot? Oh, bother." Bows, effective, yes, if you actually had one, knew how to shoot it accurately, and weren't trying to smuggle it through a palace disguised as a flower arranger. Most assassinations were up close and personal. No time for elegant marksmanship from a distant rooftop. Just quick, quiet, and hopefully not messy enough to get yourself caught. And you certainly didn't get backups. If your blade bent, broke, or, God forbid, fell down a well in the middle of a mission, time to improvise. A loose slate roof tile? Maybe. A rusty nail you found? Worth a shot. Your shoe buckle wielded with desperate intent. Desperate times called for incredibly desperate measures. You carried your meagre tools hidden in hems, in the soles of your worn boots, or inside hollowed-out bread if you were truly inventive and hungry. And you kept them close, not just for safety, but because, in this line of work, your weapon was your best friend, your boss, and your only retirement plan. There were no upgrades, no tinkering with gear between missions like some kind of medieval R&D department. You didn't polish your kit. You prayed it didn't betray you mid-strike, because in the end, it wasn't the weapon that did the killing. It was you, alone, poorly equipped, and expected to perform miracles with what amounted to a butter knife and a prayer. The target, more guards than a dragon's horde, and more paranoia than a conspiracy theorist. Assassins weren't hired to take out random drunks in back alleys, no matter how annoying they were. No one paid you to stab Jeff, the sleepy candlemaker, who was probably just trying to make an honest living dimly. Your targets were important. Nobles with more gold than sense, bishops with more land than God, military officers with more enemies than friends, and sometimes, if you were really unlucky, even royalty. And those people, let's just say they were harder to kill than a stubborn rumour. First, there were the guards. Not just one or two bored sentries. Oh no. We're talking dozens, sometimes hundreds. Armed, armoured, and surprisingly well fed. Some guarded the front gate, some the back. Some just stood there looking intimidating and daring you to blink wrong. You'd spend days, sometimes weeks, memorising their patrol patterns, the specific creaks of certain doors, and exactly how many stairs it took before the night watchman with asthma needed a breather and started wheezing loudly. This was less stealth mission and more extreme medieval surveillance reality show. Second, there were the literal walls. Castles didn't have cosy front porches. They had imposing gatehouses, ominous murder holes designed to rain down unpleasantness, and moats full of things that bite, sting, or just smell really bad. If you didn't fall into the water and get eaten by a particularly grumpy carp, You still had to worry about arrow slits and boiling oil. Yes, boiling oil. Your job description, had you actually been given one, would have likely included may get spontaneously combusted for peaking. It really narrowed down the viable entry points. Third, there were the servants and staff. The cooks, who knew every secret passage to the pantry. The scribes, who noticed every unusual detail. The stable boys, who knew every horse in the stable and every stranger lurking nearby. One wrong look from you, one clumsy movement, and they'd be whispering to the guard captain faster than you could say, "I'm just the herbalist, honest. Just checking on the, very rare roof moss." Assassins weren't just fighting swords and spears. They were fighting gossip. And medieval gossip travelled at light speed, especially if it meant someone got to keep their head firmly attached to their shoulders. And finally, your actual target. Paranoid. Rightfully so, mind you. These people were surrounded by backstabbers, relatives with tenuous claims to their titles, and 3 dozen sycophants who pretended to like them while secretly plotting their demise. They didn't eat without a tester, usually some poor, unfortunate peasant who got a promotion they didn't ask for. They didn't sleep without 3 heavy locks on the door. Some even slept in decoy beds or rotated rooms like a deadly, high-stakes version of musical chairs, just to keep potential assassins on their toes. And don't get excited if you hear they're attending a lavish feast. Yes, they'll be drunk, but so will you after an hour of trying to blend in. And you'll still have to get past the royal guards, 3 very alert dogs, a jester who probably sees everything, and 50 drunken witnesses holding tankards who could point you out with surprising accuracy after a few more rounds. Even getting close to your target could take weeks, posing as a low-ranking servant, bribing a chambermaid with a stolen trinket, hiding in barrels that smelled suspiciously of fermented cabbage. And when the moment finally came, when the stars and the guards' patrol paths aligned, you had one shot, one precise, perfect, non-squeaky, non-bloody, ghost-vanish-in-the-night moment. Or you'd become the next public deterrent, swinging slowly from the castle gate with a sign that read, "Nice try, but no banana." The disguise, looking less like a master of stealth and more like a malnourished, confused wanderer. Let's be honest, when you picture a medieval assassin, you probably imagine sleek black robes, perhaps some stylish leather braces, and a mysterious hood billowing dramatically in the moonlight as you leap silently across rooftops. Reality, you looked like a sick goat herder who hadn't bathed in a month, with something very lumpy and suspicious hidden under his arm. Disguises in the Middle Ages weren't exactly high fashion. You didn't have custom-tailored cloaks made of shadowy fabric or retractable armor plates. You had whatever you could scavenge, beg, borrow, or steal. Peasant rags that were probably home to several generations of fleas, a monk's robe 2 sizes too big that made you trip, or the remains of a guard uniform that definitely still smelled like its previous, much larger, and probably very sweaty owner. The goal was to blend in, but blending in meant looking like everyone else who hadn't seen soap in 2 weeks, limped from old injuries that never quite healed, and had a nervous twitch from malnutrition. You didn't look suspicious because of your slick, dark cloak. You looked suspicious because you kept adjusting your belt to hide a dagger wrapped in a piece of cheesecloth, and you were clearly trying to remember which way was north. And forget masks. There were no intricately designed Guy Fawkes options here. Most face coverings just made you look like a leper, which was great for avoiding conversation, but terrible for trying to enter a nobleman's fancy party. If anyone, by some miracle, asked who you were, you had to think fast, invent a backstory on the spot, and hope your improvised accent sounded somewhat convincing. I'm Brother Tobias. I take care of silent prayer and, rooftop maintenance. Yes, very important work. Climbing up there, checking for, spiritual leaks. Even assuming you miraculously made it past the guards, noble households weren't full of idiots. Servants who spent their entire lives observing every tiny detail noticed unfamiliar faces, especially ones that fumbled their chamber pots, looked utterly bewildered by a simple fork, and couldn't even name the cook's particularly plump cat. You were always one. I've never seen you before. Who are you, and why do you smell like a stable? Away from being clubbed over the head with a candlestick. And if, by some truly bizarre twist of fate, your disguise did work, congratulations. You now had to stay in character for hours, pretending to be a kitchen scullery boy, while trying not to notice all the very stab-worthy people wandering by. Also, wigs, they didn't exist. If you needed to look older or younger, you were stuck smearing dirt on your face, squinting dramatically, and hoping no one got close enough to notice that your beard was actually glued on with honey and rapidly attracting flies. The truth was, your disguise didn't protect you. It bought you maybe 5 minutes of confusion, tops. After that, you had to be gone, truly invisible, or so incredibly convincing that you could pass off a rusty butter knife as a divine relic. And if anyone saw through it, if your facade cracked, well, let's just say no one wants to be the medieval assassin caught in the bishop's laundry room, wearing a suspiciously ill-fitting nun's habit and clutching a sword, especially not on a feast day. The indignity alone would kill you. The solo act, a lonely, paranoid existence, fueled by mistrust. In medieval times, if you were an assassin, you didn't have a team. There was no Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, no loyal sidekick with a conveniently silent crossbow, no clever alchemist tinkering in a secret lair, and certainly no supportive handler who gave you coded scrolls and warm words of encouragement. You had you, a rusty dagger, and enough crippling trust issues to fill a library. There were no guilds you could actually count on, no annual conventions where you swapped tips and shared war stories. And if there were whispers of a brotherhood of assassins, it was mostly tavern talk, fueled by too much watered-down ale and sheer boredom. Probably started by a bard trying to drum up a paying audience. You were more likely to meet a genuine ghost than another professional killer who actually wanted to network. So, what's your specialty? Garrote? Poison? Tripping them downstairs? Why the extreme isolation? Because in your business, the fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you lived. Every contact was a profound risk. Every loose tongue was a potential noose around your neck. Even your client might not know your real name, and if they did, you were already planning your next elaborate disappearing act, companionship. Laughable. Friends asked inconvenient questions. Lovers noticed bruises, bloodstains on your clothes, and why you always slept with a blade clutched under your pillow, even on the warmest nights. You couldn't settle down, couldn't afford to plant roots. One tiny mistake, one fleeting moment of recognition in a crowded market, and your entire existence turned into a frantic sprint for the nearest sewer grate. Even fellow criminals kept their distance. Thieves and smugglers, while hardly law-abiding citizens, were at least somewhat sociable. You were that guy who makes people disappear. They feared you, or worse, saw you as a walking, breathing liability. No one wanted to share their stew with someone whose occupation could attract a furious mob with torches and pitchforks at any moment. And don't expect sympathy. You couldn't exactly confide in a barkeep about how hard it was to sleep after silently strangling a corrupt bishop. If you talked about your job, people assumed you were either lying, dangerously insane, or both, and they wouldn't be wrong. So you kept your secrets, your physical scars, and your increasingly numerous psychological scars to yourself. At inns, you always sat in the darkest corner, your back firmly against the wall, your eyes constantly scanning the door, always aware of every shadow. You never drank too much, never stayed more than a single night, and never spoke your name unless someone paid you first, and even then, it probably wasn't your real one. Being a medieval assassin meant perfecting the grim art of vanishing, not just in a crowd, but from every single life you never got to truly have. It was a life lived in constant, suffocating fear, a solitary dance with death, that ended only when death finally caught up. The failed mission, a very public performance of immediate, painful doom. Let's say you took the job. You meticulously planned your route. You bribed the right doorman with a surprisingly shiny button. You disguised yourself as a very convincing, albeit slightly anxious, chimney sweep. And then you froze. Maybe the target turned around unexpectedly, his eyes momentarily meeting yours. Maybe they were unexpectedly accompanied by their small, innocent child, playing with a wooden toy. Maybe you just got the shakes at the absolute worst possible moment, and your knife hand trembled like a terrified squirrel trying to hide a particularly large nut. Guess what? You're now very, very dead. Because failure for a medieval assassin wasn't a slap on the wrist, a stern talking to, or a bad performance review where they put you on a performance improvement plan. It was a public, excruciatingly painful, and wildly theatrical death, often involving ropes, fire, breaking wheels, or various sharp iron devices with charming names like the Bone Cracker's Delight or the Impaler's Hug. Missing the kill didn't just mean a missed opportunity, it meant blowing the entire operation sky high. Your target lived, and immediately, and very loudly, told everyone within earshot that someone tried to murder them. Suddenly, you weren't a shadow. You were a highly wanted man, with a surprisingly detailed description, especially for someone who only saw you for a second, and probably a crude, unflattering sketch, tacked to every tavern wall within a 30-mile radius. And those guards you once snuck past, the ones who seemed so sleepy, now they're highly motivated, probably by a significant reward, and they're looking for you with all the enthusiasm of a hungry pack of wolves. Sometimes, it wasn't even your target you had to worry about most. It was your client. If you failed, you were no longer an asset. You were a massive liability. You were someone who could be captured, tortured, interrogated, or worse, talk. The very people who paid you, the ones who whispered sweet promises of gold, would be the first to put out a second contract on you. And there were absolutely no second chances. No, oops, sorry, the blade slipped. I'll try again tomorrow, promise. You had one shot, one precise, terrifying moment in time. And if you blew it, the very best you could hope for was to die quickly, before anyone found out who had hired you. Failure also meant a profound, silent, humiliating kind of shame. You didn't just fail to kill. You failed to be invisible, to be perfect, to be the silent instrument of death. And for assassins, perfection wasn't just a goal. It was survival itself. Anything less might as well paint a giant bullseye on your back and start practicing your eloquent final word speech. It didn't matter how many successful jobs you'd done before. No one cared that you succeeded 12 times in a row, because, in this profession, you're only as good as your last kill. And if your last kill didn't happen, if it ended in a spectacular failure, you'd better start running, and praying your legs don't give out. The success story. Running, forever running, and maybe a fleeting moment of dry hay. So, you did it. Against all odds, against every single medieval inconvenience known to man, the plan worked. The dagger struck true. There were no screams, no alarmed guards, just a clean, silent drop to the floor. And a very important person who now wasn't. Congratulations. Now run for your life. Because being a successful assassin in medieval times didn't mean sipping fine wine on a rooftop while the city burns dramatically behind you. It meant fleeing through filthy back alleys, with someone's fresh blood on your boots, and a very determined dog already sniffing your trail. There was no victory lap, no celebratory post-job drink with phantom colleagues, no casual debrief with your anonymous client. You didn't even get a moment to admire your handiwork, to bask in the macabre glow of a job well done. The instant your blade struck, your new, primary, and utterly terrifying job became escaping everyone who now wants to murder you in increasingly creative and painful ways. Guards coming, doors locked, horses tied up on the other side of town, and you're probably bleeding from a stray scratch. You had to have planned your exit even more meticulously than the kill itself. Escape routes, emergency disguises, fallback safe houses that were probably just slightly less damp sheds. Maybe a boatman who owed you a favor or, more realistically, just didn't ask questions as long as the coin was good. Because the entire city would go on lockdown within minutes. No one wanted a scandal involving a dead nobleman. And lockdown meant closed gates, armed checkpoints everywhere, and a dozen angry men with swords who had all just received your rough sketch and the chilling phrase, "Suspect is probably armed and extremely stabby." And let's talk about the client again. Assuming they actually planned to pay you and weren't already plotting your demise, they certainly weren't going to meet you at a cozy tavern with a smile and a thank you card. They'd probably vanish too, because an assassin who just completed a job is, ironically, the most dangerous person alive to them. You knew too much. You knew who wanted whom dead, when, why, and possibly how much they were willing to pay for such a grim service. That made walking, talking liability, not just to their enemies, but directly to them. So, even when you succeeded, you walked away with a handful of dirty coin in one hand, and a giant, invisible target painted on your back. And what did you truly win? A week of sleeping in flea-ridden haylofts, bribing slightly less corrupt ferry captains, shaving your hastily growing beard in the dark with a rusty knife, and pretending your name was Brother Lucian as you desperately tried to blend in with a group of monks heading east. Because success didn't mean survival. It meant starting the whole grim game over in a new city, under a new, equally false name, with even more people looking for you this time, all of them highly motivated and well armed. So yes, you made the kill. Now run like hell, and don't look back, ever. The public perception. Witches, demons, and very angry pitchforks. If being a medieval assassin wasn't already miserable enough, poor, constantly hunted, and sleeping in places that smelled vaguely like goat and despair, you also had to deal with the wonderfully creative paranoia of the people around you. Because in the Middle Ages, assassins weren't just feared, they were considered profoundly cursed. To the average peasant, you weren't just a killer in a hood. You were some unholy creature who whispered to demons under a blood moon and smeared frog guts on your blade. Why else would you be able to sneak past guards, vanish into thin air, and cause someone to drop dead without a visible wound? Logic wasn't exactly popular back then. Rational thought was for nerds with books. But superstition, oh, that was everywhere, thicker than the medieval smog. Some believed Assassins could shapeshift into animals, usually rats, or particularly shifty-looking badgers. Others claimed you were invisible unless bathed in holy water, which was inconvenient for blending into a crowd. One popular and utterly terrifying tale suggested assassins made pacts with forest spirits and could literally breathe death through solid walls. Imagine trying to walk through a village market and hearing a terrified woman mutter to her child, "Don't make eye contact." He might hex the baby and turn it into a toad. Or worse, he might try to sell you a cursed turnip. Even your tools were suspect. Carrying a dagger? Clearly, it was forged in a cursed forge goblin blacksmith during a demonic ritual. Using poison? That wasn't primitive chemistry. That was witchcraft of the highest order. And you probably stirred it with a severed toe under a full blood moon, while chanting unspeakable incantation. You'd think this pervasive fear might actually help you. After all, people would avoid you, right? They'd give you a wide berth, leave you alone in your shadowy corners. But the reality was far worse. Superstitious mobs don't hesitate. They don't ask nuanced questions. They throw stones, set fires, and shout things like, "Burn him before he calls lightning upon our cow." Your terrifying reputation made people overreact at the slightest provocation. The second someone died unexpectedly, whether from a sudden illness, an unfortunate accident involving a loose cart, or just choking on a particularly stubborn chicken bone, someone would whisper, maybe it was a shadow man. Maybe it was him. He was seen near the well last week, looking suspicious. You could be hunted just for existing in the same village as a suspicious death. That meant you had to keep moving, always. Stay too long, and suddenly a nervous priest is ringing the church bell frantically, while 5 angry farmers, who had probably been waiting for this moment their entire boring lives, hold pitchforks like they're about to engage in a divine joust. And heaven help you if you were caught with anything remotely weird or out of place. A pouch of dried herbs that looked vaguely magical, strange foreign coins that weren't from this kingdom, or even just a slightly unusual accent. That's all it took for someone to shout, "Sorcerer," "Demon," or "Foreigner," and light a torch with a terrifying amount of enthusiasm. In a world that genuinely believed monsters wore human faces, being too quiet, too clever, or too fast made you an immediate threat. And in medieval logic, threats had to die quickly, and preferably on fire, just to be sure. The art of poisoning, a recipe for disaster, diarrhea, and even more problem. Poison, the assassin's weapon of theoretical elegance. The fantasy image is clear. A quiet kill, no mess, no screaming, no clanging of steel on bone. Just a sip, a gentle stagger, a theatrical sigh, and done. That's the theory. In practice, poisoning someone in the Middle Ages was like trying to win a medieval bar fight with herbal tea and a deeply bad attitude. It was less silent death and more gastric distress lottery. First off, medieval poisons were about as reliable as a politician's promise. You didn't have access to purified cyanide, carefully measured doses, or a neat little pill labelled fast-acting doom guaranteed. Oh no. You had plants you picked from damp, shady areas, suspiciously colourful mushrooms that might just be a really strong laxative, various dubious minerals, or maybe the occasional toad you bravely squeezed for its noxious secretion. You had to gather them, usually at night, then grind them in a mortar and pestle that probably doubled as a kitchen tool, and then pray to whatever deity would listen that it would actually work as intended. And even then, it might just give the target a severe stomachache and a newfound fervent commitment to his anti-assassin guard team. There was no scientific measurement, no precise dosing. You eyeballed it, hoping for the best. a pinch too little, and the noble just vomits dramatically, cancels dinner plans, and becomes incredibly suspicious of every future meal. A pinch too much, and you might die from exposure to your own potent concoction before the first course is even served. The irony was usually not lost on anyone who found you. Also, medieval kitchens were less culinary art studio and more chaotic, dimly lit germ factory. You couldn't just waltz in, throw on an apron, and season the soup with nightshade. You had to bribe or impersonate a cook, who was probably already suspicious of everyone. You had to sneak in while no one was watching, which was difficult given the sheer number of people living in close quarters. Or, worst of all, you had to try and poison a meal that would go through 3 or more tasters, a designated food sniffer, and a dog. Yes, a dog. If the dog keeled over, you knew you had a problem. And if your victim was a noble, they didn't just casually eat food. They treated it like a full-blown military operation. Meals were tasted by a designated food tester, blessed by a priest, sniffed by everyone from the head steward to the jester, and sometimes even passed under a magnifying glass. By the time the food actually hit their plate, it had passed through more security checks than a royal wedding procession. Even assuming you miraculously did it, you slipped in the poison, it wasn't detected, and the target actually ate it. The next part was wildly unpredictable. Some poisons took hours to work, some took days. 1 minute, your mark is laughing boisterously at a crude joke. The next, he's clutching his stomach and demanding to see his astrologer, convinced he's been cursed by an evil spirit. And if, by some twisted fate, they survived the poisoning, guess who they'd immediately blame? Not the cook for unsanitary practices, not the taster for being bad at his job. You, the quiet man with the herbal knowledge and the twitchy eyes who looked suspiciously like a foreign vagabond. So, poisoning wasn't efficient. It was risky, incredibly slow, and full of variables, almost none of them in your favor. And if you were caught during the act, you didn't get a quick, merciful death. You got interrogated with a charming array of tools until you confessed to poisoning everyone, the Duke to the Duke's favorite pet hamster, whether you did it or not. The legacy, a name nobody knew, a grave nobody visited, a footnote that wasn't even written. You'd think that if you successfully changed the course of history by removing a tyrant, subtly sabotaging a royal bloodline, or silencing a critical political threat, someone, somewhere, would remember your name. Perhaps a hidden plaque, a whispered legend. Nope, you were an assassin. That meant your name was never meant to be remembered. At best, you might become a vague rumor, a chilling whisper, some hooded figure, a foreigner with cold eyes, or the quiet man who never quite finished his ale and then vanished. You might have pulled off the most legendary, intricate, high-stakes hit of the entire century, and still ended up as nothing more than a mysterious death in the official, meticulously kept record. In fact, that was precisely the point. Your client didn't want a story, a monument, or a folk hero. They wanted plausible deniability. The fewer people who knew who did it, the safer they were, and the less likely they were to end up on the receiving end of their own assassin's poison. So, your name was buried the moment the job was done, if you even used a real one to begin with. You didn't sign your work with a flourish. You didn't brag about your accomplishments in a tavern, unless you had a death wish. You didn't keep trophies, unless a rusty spoon counts. You simply didn't exist outside the brutal, fleeting moment of the kill. And if someone did happen to know your name, that was a dangerous loose end. And in your profession, loose ends had a very short, very unfun shelf life. And forget about honor or glory. There were no medals for silence, no grand stone monuments for the man who stopped a war with a single, precisely placed dagger in the night. If a noble wanted a statue, they commissioned one for themselves, usually one that exaggerated their muscles and made them look perpetually constipated. You got a rough wooden box, an unmarked grave in a pauper's field, or, if things really, really badly, your head on a spike labelled traitor as a public deterrent. Sometimes your name was known, but only so it could be cursed, whispered in hushed tones of fear and hatred. You'd become a cautionary tale, a chilling warning. Don't cross the king. Remember what happened to Lord Ulrich? Yes, and the man who did it. Gone like a ghost. That was your legacy. Not fame, not fear, just absence. You weren't supposed to leave a mark on history. You were supposed to vanish completely, as if you'd never been there at all. And if you stuck around long enough to be genuinely known, that was a fatal mistake. Because, in the unforgiving medieval world, heroes got remembered. Assassins got erased. Period. The betrayal: trust no one, not even your paymaster. Especially your paymaster. Let's say, against every single medieval odd, you beat the odds. You survived the kill. You navigated the labyrinth of lies and betrayal. You even managed to survive the often failed poisonings. You outlived your enemies, your employers, and probably your own rapidly dwindling sense of morality. Now what? You retire? Absolutely not. Because in medieval times, assassins didn't get retirement plan. There were no farewell banquets with cake and speeches, no quiet cottages by the sea where you could whittle away your golden years, no pensions paid in glistening gold coins and grateful whispers. You didn't gracefully fade into a peaceful, anonymous life. You vanished, or you died. Often both, simultaneously. The problem was elegantly simple and brutally effective. You were never truly safe. Even if you walked away from the profession, your past didn't walk away from you. You had too many dangerous secrets locked in your head, too many names in your memory, far, far too much blood on your hand. Powerful people didn't want you retired and living comfortably. They wanted you utterly forgotten, which usually meant buried, preferably in an unmarked grave where no one could ever find you. And even if no one actively came after you, and that's a monumental if in this line of work, you had to live with the constant gnawing fear that someone might, that a new assassin, younger, hungrier, and far more eager to prove himself, had just received a contract for a shadowy aging figure who used to be someone dangerous, someone who knew too much. So, you changed your name again, and again. You moved to a new village where no one asked questions, usually because they were too busy trying to survive. You faked a limp, sold questionable herbs, pretended you once worked as a particularly dull guard. But even then, you didn't sleep well. Not deeply, not peacefully. You avoided crowds like the plague, ironic. You always sat facing the door at any establishment. You kept your trusty dagger, or what was left of it, under the floorboard next to the small pouch of coins you never touched, because it still smelled faintly of the man you earned it from, and you couldn't even trust yourself either. Years of silent killings and quick, desperate escapes did something profound to your brain. Every unexpected knock on the door made you flinch violently. Every stranger on the road seemed to subtly recognize you. You stopped dreaming, because dreaming was dangerous. It brought back faces, screams, and the dull thud of bodies. You couldn't love, not truly, not without putting them in danger. You couldn't relax. You couldn't even laugh too loud, lest someone notice you. You lived like a ghost, pretending to be a man, a fleeting shadow haunted by its own path. The grim truth was, there was no glorious endgame for a medieval assassin. No triumphant final chapter. Just a slow, cold fade into ever deeper obscurity. Always moving, always watching, always paranoid, until one day you simply slipped into the dark and absolutely no one noticed. Maybe, just maybe, that was the best you could ever hope for. A quiet, unremembered end. The harsh reality. Don't try this at home, or in the Middle Ages. By now, after this delightful journey into medieval misery, you've probably figured it out. Being a medieval assassin wasn't darkly romantic. It wasn't noble. It wasn't even all that profitable. Unless your definition of profitable includes barely surviving and constantly smelling like desperation. It was a grim, thankless, short-lived career, wrapped in blood-stained linen, and followed by a persistent crowd of very angry people who wanted you dead in increasingly imaginative ways. Let's be brutally honest, you wouldn't last, not a week, maybe not even a single day, because you'd start with all the wrong assumptions. You'd imagine yourself sleek, in control, a whisper in the dark, a master of your deadly craft. But what you'd really be is cold, perpetually hungry, and one bad guess away from a public execution on the news. You'd slip into town, cloak pulled tight, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and naive excitement, ready for action, only to discover that your target moved locations 3 days ago. The guards, who looked half asleep from a distance, are actually drunk but still trigger happy. And that charming stable boy you paid for vital information, he just sold you out for a single mug of ale and a crust of bread. Probably with a hearty laugh. You'd freeze at the wrong time. You'd stab the wrong guy. Probably a snoring porter instead of the duke. You'd get spotted by someone's overly observant maid who once saw your distinctive, slightly crooked nose near the chapel entrance. And suddenly, you're not a shadow. You're the problem. The most pressing issue in the entire town. Then what? You run. But you're not used to the treacherous medieval terrain, the ankle-deep mud, the impossibly uneven cobblestones, the absolutely insane number of loose chickens that seem specifically designed to trip you at the worst possible moment. You slip, you fall, you get tackled by a burly guard named Thomas, who just got dumped by his sweetheart and is looking for a violent outlet. And let's say, by some improbable miracle, you survive that initial capture. Then you deal with the aftermath. No allies, no honor, and no future beyond the confines of a very cold, very damp dungeon. Just whispers, suspicion, and the growing, chilling realization that even if you somehow succeed against all odds, the absolute best you can ever hope for is to die old and alone, hiding behind a false name in a tiny, forgotten village that still believes in mischievous fairies. So no, you wouldn't last, and frankly, you shouldn't even try, because the assassin's life wasn't cool, wasn't heroic, and wasn't remotely glamorous. It was a cruel, unforgiving machine that chewed people up and spat out nothing but shadows and regret. It offered the illusion of power without peace, and a grim purpose without any place in the world. You didn't make history. You erased yourself from it, leaving no trace. And the only thing truly waiting for you at the very end was silence. A profound, lasting silence that no one would ever question, because no one even remembered you were ever there in the first place. So, are you still planning your medieval assassin cosplay? Or perhaps just thinking about ordering a pizza and staying safely, warmly, and unstabbed in the 21st century? Let me know in the comments, and maybe hit that like button before you vanish into your own personal shadow.